Okie doke. Welcome back to the last panel of the German Cannabis Industry Association. Herzlich willkommen nochmal für die letzte Runde, die wir hier als Branchenverband Cannabiswirtschaft machen. Wir werden das jetzt auch in Englisch machen. Leider Gottes steht David draußen und kommt nicht rein, weil einfach zu viele Leute hier sind. Wir versuchen alles, vielleicht kommt er noch nach. We will do that in English as well, because we have an international crowd here. Before we start, I would like to introduce you the people on the panel. Elias, coming from Switzerland, he's the president of the IG Hanf, the sister, brother, something company, organization in Switzerland from us, so we are working very closely together. Seaman, Dr. Seaman, I'm really sorry for that, coming from the Cannabis Industry Council in the UK. A lot of experience, interesting market, lots of developments. And on the panel right now, Daniel Kruse from the European Hemp Association, president. So we have a very interesting group, and we are hoping that David can make it. He comes from the United States Cannabis Council, and would be really good to have him on the panel as well. But nevertheless, we will just start, and the main topic we want to touch today is there something beyond our single countries we are working on, except of Daniel, who is doing a European-wide approach. But I would describe it that way. In Germany, we now have a discussion about Pillar 2, and we heard yesterday in the discussion of the politicians that they are optimistic that we get it done, but we heard that a lot, and I trusted when I see the signature under it. But if we really have a look what is needed to have a full legalized market somewhere in Europe or somewhere else in the world, especially in Europe, we are talking about small things like the EU, changing regulations in the EU, which is at the end of the day a kindergarten situation if we compare it to the really needed stuff, which is we have a lovely single narcotic convention from 1961 on the UN level, which kind of prohibits us to really move ahead with cannabis legalization. So that might be the really interesting piece. So by saying that, I would like to start with the question to all of you. How is your feeling in your regions, in your countries, in Switzerland, in the UK, and on the EU level? Has something changed over the last 10 years when we look at cannabis? Elias, I mean, a lot of things have changed in Switzerland, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. So there has been a lot of changes in Switzerland, particularly because I make a comparison to what you guys are doing in Germany right now. We already have the Pillar 2 in that case, so that kicked off successfully after 10 years of planning, actually. So that was a long time in the making, but now we are there since 1.5 years now. We're dispensing in Switzerland cannabis for the test instance, and right after that we are also right now in the works of a new legislation for recreational cannabis use, and that's right now where our most focus is on. But as you said, I think we have the CBD as well that changed in the last 10 years. In Switzerland is a little bit more relaxed on the cannabis part than it has been maybe in the EU in general and in England as well. And what we also had was the medicinal law that also changed recently. That's not where we wanted to be, like in Germany, for example. But yeah, we're sure getting there step by step. And I think the big one is the Single Convention Act that needs to be changed on the bigger level.
I mean, we all represent industry associations, so we are not just in the business, having our companies, dealing with the product. We are also trying to organize ourselves and the industry to influence politics Callie, I mean, the UK has always been a very interesting setup, and I never had the feeling that British politics was really behind cannabis. Is there, and you will have elections in a couple of weeks. What is your outlook if we look at the elections, and do you think there is movement on the political side in the UK as well?
I mean, going back to the last 10 years, things have definitely changed. I mean, we've got medical cannabis being prescribed. I mean, that was 5 years ago. That will be in this November, but 5 years ago. But things have not progressed as far as we wanted them to progress. They could have been a lot better. We've still only got private clinics that are prescribing. Within the UK, we have the NHS, that many drugs are freely available on there through the NHS. It's still not prescribed on the NHS. There's only 2 licensed products that are able to be prescribed. Unfortunately, these are only for particular indications. Now, again, there's been movement on the hemp side of things. We've had a change in legislation there. We've gone from 0.2% THC to 0.3% THC. So it's a start, it's a baby step, but it is a move in the right direction. As far as recreational, that isn't even on the table at all. Unless we get the Lib Dems get in, which I think majority of the people within this room have got their fingers crossed for that, recreational is nowhere near on the table. We've got a lot of moving forwards with innovation for medicines and research and clinical studies, but both Labour and the Conservatives aren't even daring to speak about cannabis in any way, shape or form. They're almost avoiding the conversation. You've only got the Liberal Democrats who are openly saying we want legalisation. We've got the Green Party as well, but these are the minority parties, and the reality is the only way they will get in is if there's a coalition, unfortunately. But it did happen previously, and we have had a 0.1% increase in THC in the hemp market. So we've got to celebrate those little wins and not just be doom and gloom and thinking that it's going nowhere. We have got it being prescribed medicinally. It's a start, but we've got a lot of public opinion to change in the UK. There's still a lot of stigma surrounding it, and doctors still afraid of it and see it as a drug of misuse. It's a drug of kids hanging around in the park and just getting stoned and eating pizzas and playing computer games, unfortunately.
Great, yeah, or not that great. Let's wait and see what the elections bring. But Daniel, and welcome, David. Glad you make it. It's difficult. So you all should be very happy that you are in here. It seems really difficult to get in right now, and but welcome, David. So just as I said, David is coming from the USCC, from the United States Cannabis Council, and he already told us a bit about the US yesterday. But moving on, David, we just started talking about our organization and what developed over the last 10 years. But Daniel, I mean, I would call you a classical EU lobbyist, which is a pretty difficult job to have. And you're representing the whole hemp industry on the European level. My question to you is, I have the feeling that hemp and cannabis was never a real topic on the EU level so far. What is your feeling over the last 10 years?
Well, first of all, hemp has been on the agenda in the European Union and especially in Brussels. Thank God I'm not the main lobbyist. We have Lorenza, our managing director, for those talks. But obviously, when you're doing hemp, when you're doing cannabis, you become a lobbyist by nature. So kind of true for me, for myself too. When it comes to the first questions that you had and you started the round of this panel, I would like to keep the question and my answer separate. So when it comes to cannabis, right now, probably for the first time in history, Germany is taking a leading role in the European Union. I mean, Switzerland has the leading role, but it's not the European Union. And this makes this situation very special right now. I know that Czech Republic is watching us very closely here. They have a very modern, very constructive approach themselves, but of course they waited strategically for what Germany will be doing and what Germany did with the 1st of April this year. We have just had our EIHA conference in Prague, and we talked to their narcotic advisor. He was there personally at the conference, and obviously he follows very closely what we have done here, and now they will implement something very similar to what Germany did. And that will be another signal for the European Union, because there will be already 2 member states that have a more modern, more constructive, more liberal approach when it comes to cannabis. First part of my answer. First part B, with hemp, we always had the advantage that the European Union was basically faster than the member states, for example, Germany, when it comes to max levels of THC on the field. The EU changed from 0.2 to 0.3, not Germany, not any other member state. They were forced by Brussels. Also, the THC values, max levels for food, was proposed by the Commission, and Brussels basically then dictated to the member states to change their laws accordingly. So now to the second part of your question, Dirk, and you already answered that exactly the same way as I feel. What we really need is a change of the single convention. This is something that not one of our singular organizations can do, because as the name says, the single convention comes from the UN, United Nations. To change something that the United Nations approached, we have to unite. And I'm very happy that a couple of years ago, actually 2 years ago, we, as one of the founding members, EIHA, started to now work with as FIHO, as the Federation of International Hemp Organizations, and single convention, a change, an update, an upgrade of the single convention is one of our top priorities on the agenda, and I welcome all of you and appreciate your interest. If you can join us, if you can work with us, if you just cooperate, if you just communicate with us, because as a Federation of International Hemp Organizations and Cannabis Organizations, of course, we have the chance to change the single convention itself. It probably takes 10 to 15 years, but we are still all young enough to experience that moment.
So I'm happy to come back in 15 years and celebrate here. I mean, we probably need a wheelchair then when we do that for 15 years, but it's a nice one. David, welcome to the group. You told us yesterday loud about what's happening in the US and what the expectations are. If we look at the UN level, do you think significant changes in the US would really help us to move things forward?
Yes, is the short answer, and thanks for having me. Sorry I was late. There was quite a line outside. So just to back up and give folks a little bit of background that we're not here yesterday, the United States is going through a very historic move right now in terms of where cannabis should be on schedule. So this was initiated by the President in October of 2022, and it's a two-step process. It goes to the Department of Health and Human Services. They completed their work, which was a 252-page scientific analysis. They submitted that then to the Department of Justice, which is phase 2. And DOJ had this until earlier this year. They then released their recommendation in line with HHS, which was also that cannabis should be moved down to Schedule 3. So we are in a public comment period right now. It's going to be done in the middle of July, and I expect the Department of Justice to issue final rule on this probably before the election, so September, October. And the importance of this, to your question, is that we have more scientific data than we have ever had as we've looked at where cannabis should be on schedule. I mean, in my opinion, cannabis never should have been on schedule in the first place. We use this as really a tool to put people of color in prison, primarily black men. And this is something we've done in the United States, unfortunately, very effectively for the last 50 years. So I don't think cannabis should have ever been on schedule. However, they are going to move it down to Schedule 3. The data that they have, Dirk, is from the states. So for the first time, we have taken state-level scientific data and we have used that in this look at where cannabis should be on schedule. And in my opinion, that is going to be the most important thing as we deal with the United Nations. And I think that as more and more data accumulates in the states and more states come online, we're going to have a better case to be made. For those of you that have not seen the Department of Health and Human Services document, it's 252 pages long. It is a rigorous scientific examination of where cannabis should be on schedule. Take a look at it. And that is what we're going to be using, this group right here and others, as we start talking to folks at the UN about where cannabis should be on schedule. And I think it's going to be a really important step in the process.
Thank you, David. We have 27 members of the EU, plus a former member. But we also have 186 countries, I think, who signed the Single Narcotic Convention globally. We see in the EU that not everyone is happy with the way Switzerland is moving ahead, with Germany is moving ahead, with what we see in Poland and the Czech Republic and so on. Callie, I mean, the UK is not part of the EU anymore, but we still see a back and forth between both of us. Do you see an opportunity for the industry to form a European group which can help navigating through this discussion within Europe and within the member states? If so, what do you think is the most important piece, you as a representative of the industry, but also with your background? What is really important? What are the 2-3 things we need to have in mind if we want to move ahead together?
Production of data. Data backs everything up. At the moment, without the data, we can't move forwards, we can't make conclusions. And this is what keeps coming back in the UK from the MHRA, from BPNA. We need more data surrounding it to back up its efficacy and its safety as well. But I think we need to be looking for data around the family unit as well. So what effects does legalization have around the world on things like domestic violence, the home life? How does that affect it on crime as well? And not just crime as a whole. Is there an increase in theft? Is there a decrease in violent crimes? And we need to look at this as society as a whole as well. And we need to generate that data in order to present it to the UN so that we can, with no qualms about actually changing the law, that we are doing this in a sensible manner. Now, every substance has a side effect. We can't deny that, and we need to have a balanced argument as well. We need to make sure that we are looking at everything from every perspective. Personally, I have a concern about this ever-increasing concentration of THC. There's an ever-demanding need for higher and higher THC. Now, is there an actual need, or are we just fueling the next opiate epidemic that we were seeing? Or is it just going to be replaced with this? So we need to create the data around that as well. What was the second side of the question as well there? Apologies.
No, I think you touched it pretty well already. So I think we took out data about not just the impact of cannabis on health, but also on social and economic elements. I had the feeling, Elias, you wanted to say something to that.
No, I would really like to confirm what you just said, because in Switzerland exactly went that route. You know, they said it needs to be evidence-based legalization or regulation in that case, and we need to have that socio-economic data that you were speaking before to really make sure what's the impact, also family, crime, but also on the health side, we already have a lot of data, and you know it's common data. I often hear the word should not be different for each country. So you actually could use a lot of that data, but there are always nuances to the different societies in that case, and that's the way that Switzerland was also able to go that route, and that we are now drafting based on that data a new regulation. So, and I hope these studies once they're available, they can also be used for other countries again to bring more evidence and to make sure that we have a harm reduction also in our way of how we regulate this substance, because we all know there are dangers to it, to abuse of, and the potential is there. But there's also a lot of good, and the harm reduction is definitely needed for everybody.
I think something we haven't also mentioned is the environmental impact. I mean, a lot of these indoor facilities are using a lot of electricity, a lot of waste is being produced from it. Stone wool is non-biodegradable, and there's a large amount of that is produced. So what is also the environmental impact of this? That we're having to do it with indoor facilities. Now, if we remove prohibition and people were allowed to freely grow it in their gardens, would we remove that environmental impact, and would that ease that impact as well? So there's, as you said, the economic side of it as well, we mentioned that, and we need to look at all of these and the harm reductions and how we can learn from other countries which have actually legalized, and those bigger impacts on everyone.
So that sounds to me that we still have a long way to go to produce all of these data, even if David said there is a lot of data available in the US already, and we have around the world, which brings me to one of the core topics we wanted to discuss today. We see different models across the world. We have the Swiss model where you moved quicker ahead with pilot projects than with medical. We have the Dutch situation where you have the pilot on growing. You have the German situation. We see Australia moving ahead very quickly right now. We see other parts of the world. We had the experiment, I would call it an experiment in Thailand, which kind of went south. And we have Canada, which is kind of the, the weird situation in the world where one country just did it. Probably not in the best way. That's discussable if we look at the economics behind that. But David, you have a very, very strong background coming from dealing with international corporations, with groups which are working together on a global scale. What do you think is the important next step we need to do as an industry globally?
Well, first of all, don't look at me when you talk about Canada, because I had nothing to do with that. I was part of...
But I have to say we know each other because we work together for Canadian companies.
Yeah. Now, we tried to fix it for a long time, not very successfully, but I had nothing to do with that. Great question. And this is something that has been on my mind for a long time. I was in the beverage alcohol space for 16 years. And one of the things that we did really, really well was coordinate with trade associations around the world. So whether it was the Tequila Regulatory Council in Mexico, or whether it was the Scotch Whisky Association, or the Distilled Spirits Council in the US, we coordinated on a regular basis through the World Spirits Alliance. And we were able to tackle, as a result, anything that was threatening from the WHO, or from the UN, or any other international issue that was problematic for us. So I think in the cannabis space, we spoke about this yesterday. I think this is something that we need to do, and we need to start the process now. And there's a couple things that are on my mind as it relates to this. Number one is just the regulatory best practices that we've seen around the world. And we have, just look at the US, we have a patchwork of state programs. Some of them are very effective. Most of them are not. Most of them are really bad, and they don't work. So we want to be able to take the best practices from our region, and we want to be able to talk about that. The second thing, and I think this is even more important, is to take a page from beverage alcohol and start talking about responsibility as an industry. And this is something that, again, I harp on day in and day out. We need to talk about youth access. We need to talk about impaired driving. We need to talk about many, many other responsibility issues, advertising and marketing practices, as an example, that the industry needs to do better. So as we become more sophisticated as an industry, and more markets open up, we need to be doing a much, much better job on the responsibility front. And this is something that anybody from any region around the world, to all of my colleagues here, like, I task each one of us with starting to work on this. And it's something that I'd like to roll out from the US side of things this fall to begin that discussion. And I'd like to be able to collaborate with folks internationally.
Daniel, what I find interesting is that we really see a different approach on cannabis and hemp in each market. It's everywhere completely different. If we look at hemp especially, we are so far behind here in Germany when it comes to hemp regulations compared to other jurisdictions. If we look at medical, we might be far ahead in Germany, while if we look at rec, we see the Canadian part, the Swiss pilots, or the different approaches in the US. And for me, I always ask myself, hemp, nobody can complain about industrial hemp because it's a great crop, it's helpful for farmers, it has so much potential. Do you feel that, and do you think that's an angle we should watch closer, because that might be something we can start with?
Very, very good question, Dirk. Well, what unites us in this particular understanding is that we have the same issue, the cannabis industry and the industrial hemp industry. It's the single convention. I don't want to bother you with it. Please look it up. It's the worst written contract that I've ever read in my life. It's so bad you would never sign it, but more than 180 nations signed it. And it's a block for all our industries. It's a block that we have to somehow crumble down. And as you said, we have gained a lot of momentum here in Germany for the medical cannabis part. And we do have an approach on the recreational, but a half-hearted approach. Still, again, because of the single convention. And even a farmer who is growing industrial hemp for seed, for fiber, for doing clothing, for doing building construction material, is still an object of this regulation that we all know the story where it came from Anslinger, thanks for that, to the US, that he actually managed to bring his propaganda ideas that he tried in the US, unfortunately first, and then he didn't succeed, and he actually succeeded to get it on the UN level, get cannabis into the single convention. That's the start of all of it, and we have to work together to overcome the situation. And now I'm coming to my point. That is the reason why me, coming from the industrial hemp industry, is happy to be at the Mary Jane and to be happy among the cannabis industry, either medical cannabis or recreational cannabis, because all these three industries have to work together, have to unite to get this single convention out of the way, and it will help all those three industries the same way. And obviously we have to keep things separate and differentiated. Industrial hemp is not medical cannabis, and medical cannabis should not be recreational cannabis or other way around, but still, the problem is the same and the markets are overlapping. So basically, it always comes down to the single convention. Sorry for repeating myself.
So we have to work together for the next couple of years. David wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, you summed it up nicely. We have a big mess in the United States as it relates to hemp. And 2018, for those of you that were watching the Farm Bill, I don't know why you would be, but that's when this all went down. Basically, the idea was that we were going to transition our farmers in the US that had taken the tobacco buyout into the hemp space. And so they legalized hemp and hemp-derived products with a very low amount of THC in the 2018 Farm Bill. And what's happened is that we have a loophole now in this law that allows for individuals to create products that are low dose yet intoxicating, hemp-derived. And instead of operating in a state legal market through a dispensary, you can actually set up your manufacturing and processing in an individual state and sell it online. So there's interstate commerce. There's no regulation of any of this. Many of these products are adulterated. There's no youth access guardrails. There's no labeling. There's nothing. So we have a market now that is almost $30 billion. $30 billion in the US that is hemp derived. And so a lot of the big multi-state operators in the US are looking at this in two different ways. One is a dramatic threat to their medical and adult use businesses, and they're trying to kill it. There's been legislation over the last month that's been introduced multiple times now that would try to kill this market altogether. Others see this as an opportunity, as an add-on to their business. And I was just in Minneapolis. You can buy hemp-derived beverages that are intoxicating at a bar. You can buy it at a restaurant. So it's almost like it's the future of what we're going to see when cannabis is fully legalized, but it's a big issue. And some see it as a threat, and some see it as an opportunity.
I think we have absolutely the same in Europe as well. I mean, we see it here every day on that side. It's a huge issue.
So, Elias, coming back to the neutral nation of Switzerland, often it's a good place to do stuff different than in other regions. If you see or if you're looking at what's happening in Switzerland right now, what can we, as the rest of Europe or internationally, really learn from how the government approaches cannabis and hemp and all what's...
Yeah, I think the Swiss government approached cannabis in a, you always have both forces, the opposition and the ones that are more liberal and looking at it. But I think also the fascinating way that they looked at it was at the heterogeneity that is out there that you talked before, David, also in the US, but globally that we have that with Canada, different models of legalization, and they went that way of assessing it, assessing it.
Yeah.
Assessing it with, scientifically, and that's really the way. But now also we're looking very much forward in the regulatory process to what is Germany doing. It's always look around, and there's one example, for example, that I find very fascinating. It's the big question about the impaired driving. What are we going to do there? So Germany is about to hopefully introduce something.
We did. It was agreed yesterday in the federal states parliament. So
fantastic.
It will be active by July 1st.
So this is what also will have a big impact on the Swiss law that is going to come there, because they are like, okay, are we going to do a zero tolerance that would actually kill it, or are we going to do and take something that is out there? And now there is something out there that is from our neighbor that we also look towards to, and that we can take that, and I hope that will have a big impact on the regulation. Then there is the taxing. How are we going to do that? What can we learn from the US? What can we learn from Canada, from those different parts? So that's really how Switzerland is looking at it, and I encourage. The Swiss are not the ones known for very fast implementing like in the US. They are more like the planners and overthinking maybe a little bit things, but I hope we can present something that can be used as a model and an add-on to this really interesting time of cannabis regulation that we have worldwide.
Okay, so last question before I open up for two questions from the audience, probably, to all of you. There are actually two questions. First of all, take out your crystal ball. I know you all have one, and that's our job as lobbyists. We love crystal balls, and everybody will ask us this question all the time. When will we change the UN Single Narcotic Convention? How long will it take us? And second, if we meet again, let's say in 2 years, what will the world look like on cannabis, and how can we as an industry support that? Let's start with Elias.
With me? Oh,
yeah.
Sorry. Oh.
Everyone should have a very quick statement on that. How long will it take until we go to Vienna and say we have a new treaty?
I don't like to do that statement. No, really. it's going to be recorded, so I'm not doing that. You should never, calculate the bill before you haven't spoken to the guy that you buy.
Okay, let me do it differently. Can we celebrate that on the next Mary Jane, or is it the day where we are old and have a wheelchair and we'll be the seniors here in the room?
No, I hope it will be in the next decade or in this. That's my statement.
I forced you. Callie?
I think we've got a very interesting year coming. There's a lot of government changes going to occur across the world. There's a lot of elections. So this time next year will be a very, very different scene. At the UK Cannabis Industry Council, we are holding off at the moment until we understand who will be elected, what are their manifestos and how we approach them. Hopefully we'll see it in the next decade. I never thought we would see what we're seeing currently. I never thought I would be at an event like this and talking about Germany legalizing recreational and even on a federal level it being legalized in the US. So I have hope, hopefully, in the next 10 years.
Daniel?
I agree. I agree that looking back to 30 years, almost 30 years in this industry, I believe we are going to be faster now because there is an industry. The first 30 years we had to rebuild it and to start it all over, and now we are there. And if we unite US, Europe, we will have a very loud word to say at the UN. And I know that South America, Africa, Australia, they're all waiting, and they will all support that with a reasonable timing and the reasonable information and data, as we talked about already. And I'm very happy that David just gave us this information because that's very, very strong to have this scientific data. It's a very strong argument for the UN to have this data from the US. So that's the background of my guess. It will be 10 to 15 years around that because there are some legal procedures to follow. There's a procedure to follow, but if we do it the right way, it will be still possible for you and me, Dirk, to walk here to this conference, to this event again and celebrate. I don't believe we will need the wheelchair by then.
David?
Well, I'm famous for avoiding this question, as you know.
And I have to, before you answer, I have to tell you that we always say, we have to be optimists in this business, because otherwise we would die.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he and I both have the same philosophy. This is a very, very tough industry. It's much tougher than the beverage alcohol space, and it's been a very bumpy ride for me personally. But I do wake up optimistic every day because I have to be, and I believe in what we're doing, and I think ultimately we're going to get there. In my mind, this question depends on the politics. So let's just think about the United States. If President Biden wins re-election, then we've got a very, very different discussion about cannabis reform in the US over his next 4 years than if Donald Trump wins. And this is the same in many other countries around the world. We were talking about at dinner last night. The politics are constantly changing, country by country. Sometimes this means a step back, and sometimes it means a significant step forward. But in my mind, we are on an upward trajectory, and I think that probably that 10-year number, I am a betting man, so I would put the over-under at 10.
Great. So hopefully we see you back in 10 years, everyone, and can open a bottle of cannabis-infused champagne. So I have time for one or two questions. Is there anyone in the room who has a question? Over there, again. That's good. I can rely on you.
Always. Hello, my name is Monroy. I'm a filmmaker, and I've been very passionately researching the industrial hemp and the international cannabis sphere for the last 10 years, speaking to many pioneers. I'm very optimistic. I really like to see people representing their own countries' associations here on stage, and I know that politicians need numbers and facts. I get it. I'm happy to hear that US seems to have accumulated a lot of data in these 250 pages. I'm still wondering, in order to convince society, I mean, all these people out there, they didn't come because of the numbers, they come because of the emotions, the lifestyle, the community, and what we need in order to change also this part of societies. Let's not forget politicians need voters, right? It's the stories. You can bore people to death with numbers, but stories stick. And as a filmmaker, I'm asking myself, when are we ready to stitch this cannabis multiverse, in a really beautiful thing? So everything, you've been in this for 20, 30 years. When are we ready to share all this wealth of knowledge, this potential? You've mentioned the sustainability part, about the medical part. This part, in my opinion, is the tiniest part of all. We should talk about medicine and how to save the planet. Our democracies are falling apart, right-wing shifts. We all know that cannabis will go down with right-wing governments. So how do we use our time now to stitch all what we know together to let people know that in the end, everyone will win with industrial hemp, medical cannabis, and recreational cannabis? And when are we ready to create something that is ready for, marketing, campaign-wise, using all these beautiful stories of all you and all cannabis people around the world? For everyone, one or two sentences, please.
Great question. Two ways I'll answer that. One is that the move in the US from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 is going to significantly normalize cannabis in the United States. I can't tell you how many politicians say to me, I am not going to work with you on this cannabis issue because it's sitting right next to heroin and other very dangerous drugs on Schedule 1. But when it's moved down to Schedule 3, the comfort level amongst conservative politicians is going to increase significantly. And I think we're going to be able to, it's the crack in the dam that we need politically in order to get much more reform done in the United States and open up a bunch more markets. That's number one. Number two, we tell the cannabis story day in and day out in the US. What you're doing is so critically important. And for those of you that have a story, talk about it. When I was at Canopy, I had a very poorly attended podcast that I did on a regular basis, and I interviewed all sorts of great people, politicians, celebrities, people with these passionate stories about cannabis. That type of messaging is what we need to get out, and it's what I share with politicians day in and day out. So we are normalizing as a society, and it's just a question of everybody getting their voice out there and sharing their story. And this normalization is going to increase significantly as a result.
Well, I agree. Great question, especially was a long question. I'm trying to give you a short answer. It's not easy to give you I'm more precise with my 10 to 15 years regarding the Syrian Convention as I can be with when are we going to have a great movie or a lobbying campaign, which it will be basically, to change an even more broader approach of all of society towards the cannabis topic. A lot of things that we talked about today, I would have not believed even 3-5 years ago. Not even, for sure not 30 years ago when I started in this industry. So things are happening very fast right now, and fortunately, in the last years, next to all the macroeconomic crisis that we had on the business levels, but on the political and regulatory side, we had very, very important steps and very positive news for our industries. Now, basically, it's all up to you, it's up to everyone. I'm not going to tell you which party exactly you should vote for, but I'm going to tell you if you want to do cannabis and hemp business in Germany successfully in the future, it should be better one of the parties that did the changes so far. Same as David said. It's basically what we are voting for, we will get. And we are right now running better with this kind of government than with the opposite one. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we need to be realistic about what cannabis it can achieve. It is a fantastic medicine. It can do so many good things, but it isn't for everyone. And we have to be realistic about that. And it isn't going to suit everyone's needs. And if we start selling it as a cure-all and everybody is going to get fantastic benefits from it, I think people will not believe it and think it's a bit of a snake oil. Is this as good as it really is? And we've got to be realistic. I am a patient myself and I use it for my epilepsy, but I will never say it will cure my epilepsy. I have to be realistic about that. And our stories that we tell, they need to be realistic. And I think that's how we can get people on board with that as well. We do need those figures, though, unfortunately, because the policymakers, they don't have enough time to listen to stories. What they want is facts and figures that they can then address back and give reason and risk assess why they are doing this. So that is where I think how we need to communicate, but do keep communicating our stories, but just be realistic about what we can achieve with it.
So Elias, you and I, we just have 20 seconds each, so. Okay. But
I make it really quick, but I think it was a beautiful question, a really beautiful question, but I think important is to note that it is the acceptance of this plant. This plant has a big stigmata, and this is where it puts it, and this is why it's so complicated. Data and facts is not everything that is there to convince those politicians, but what we've seen in the last 10 years, that acceptance rate of medicinal cannabis, the population is accepting it, and that seed needs to flourish and needs to be spread further. And yes, please do those videos, share those stories. This is exactly what we need and needs to be accepted in the society. Generally, yeah, that this is a plant, it has been there for centuries, millennia.
Maybe let me summarize this discussion we just had with each of us can do its bit to reduce stigma, and the more stigma we reduce and the more the society has experience with cannabis, hemp, medical product, whatever, the easier it will be for us. And we will do our job. Thank you. We will do our job to produce the data, to help politics to move in the right direction. And I ask all of you to do your job and help us spread the stories, spread the success stories, and please also make sure that everybody sees that we are, how did you say that, David, that we do it responsibly. And I think that's very, very important for all of us. Thank you for listening to us. I hope you have a great conference and a great exposition here. Enjoy and see you next year.